Hey there folks, the #1 fan of having absolutely zero schedule for this series from the Infinite Jukebox, here with another album review kind of, because this is the return of a series that I haven't done in a while, the Rapid Record Recap. If you aren't familiar with what this is a series that I've done very inconsistently over the course of this channel. I mean, it's always sort of been there, but it's gone from being monthly to yearly to, I think, bi-monthly at one point. I don't even keep track of it at this point, but I am now attempting to do the Rapid Record Recap quarterly, so hopefully this will be the first of 4 for the entire of 2025, maybe, we'll see. And now at this point you might be asking, hey, what the hell is the Rapid Record Recap? It's a series that I do where I talk about a bunch of records that came out throughout any period of time, in this case 3 months, January through March, and, you know, just give them a quick review. Records that I heard and had opinions on, but didn't get a chance to cover for one reason or another in a full-length review, in a quick review, or even in a short. And honestly, there usually ends up being a lot of stuff that, in one form or another, I kind of have to leave on the cutting room floor, as to not really make too much writing work for myself in my personal life. So this is a good way for me to just talk about a bunch of stuff that I wanted to talk about. So, without further ado, here is the Rapid Record Recap Series, Part 1 for 2025, January through March. Here you go. Bappy, Empty Stomach, Wilting, Faith. This latest EP from digicore artist Bappy has rightfully put them on the map for a lot of people in the music geek kind of world, including myself. I mean, this is just a really great EP overall. The entire thing is produced absolutely beautifully. Some of the best production I've heard on any record of any kind, full length or shorter like this, just in general, throughout the entirety of the year so far. Some solid vocal work, some really strong lyricism as well, and I really love a lot of the nostalgic, somber samples that you find throughout a decent portion of this record, kind of adding to the more emotive atmosphere that you honestly would kind of want from an album that is so set on creating that sort of vibe for the listener. And I mean, this just feels like a pretty perfect EP, and one of those records where I can't really convey the emotion of it and the emotional weight of it in words, so you just have to go and listen to it yourself, honestly, and you will surely be greeted by one of the best EPs of the year so far, if you choose to do so. I'm going to give this record 4 stars out of 5. Dean Blunt and Elias Rønnenfelt, Lucre. DIY underground favorite Dean Blunt and Ice Age frontman Elias Rønnenfelt collaborating here on what is basically 7 untitled sketches of various stylistic roots, but one thing is true for every track here: they're all really good, unsurprisingly, considering the musicians involved, and it makes for a memorable EP. I mean, the production is spacious and outright beautiful at times, and the melodies are both catchy and entrancing, something that's a bit of a cornerstone for both of respective artists here's individual sounds in their own work. So it's really no surprising that this EP is kind of just both parties doing what they do best in a very condensed form. I really like this one, and I think it's enjoyable both for people who are pre-established fans of either Rønnenfelt or Blunt, or for people who just want something that feels like a brief but unique listening experience for the year so far. I'm going to give this record 3.5 stars out of 5. Lil Baby, WHAM. At this point, I'm just kind of convinced that Lil Baby is not capable of making a genuinely good album, because, I mean, this sucks, man. This really blows. This is just terrible. Lil Baby is flat as ever, even when he tries to switch up his flows now and again. The beats are not that memorable at all, with a couple being outright bad, and really, he just has nothing interesting or unique to say at all, and I think that really ties into how a lot of this record feels kind of stuck in the past. A prime example of that being the track Dumb Dumb and Dumber with Young Thug and Future, which probably would have went insanely hard in like 2017, 2018 maybe, even that would be kind of pushing it a little bit, but all of those artists, it's now been almost a full decade since they've all been past their arguable creative peaks, with Lil Baby maybe not really having any sort of peak at all. It just feels like an album that represents nothing except a sound that Lil Baby is still clinging on to, and has never really been able to make successful in any particular way outside of just commercial success, and the only reason that this is better than his previous full-length studio album, It's Only Me, is because it isn't really that bloated. It ends pretty quickly, and that's the main saving grace here, because otherwise this is, once again, an outright awful album from someone who's never really put out anything above that standard. I'm going to give this record 1.5 stars out of 5. Lambrini Girls, Who Let the Dogs Out. I think that a record that is as openly feminist, as openly queer, as relentlessly radical in some ways as this one is always going to be bound to be polarizing. After all, it's 2025 and people are still bitching about shit that Bikini Kill and Bratmobile said back in the 90s, but classic rad girl aside, Who Let the Dogs Out is a musically fun and lyrically vicious outing from a band that has a lot of potential and has a ton of energy despite being only made up of two performers here. I mean, it's hard not to get behind the bite of Phoebe Lunny's bright and heavy accented vocals on songs like Big Dick Energy, for example, as she especially makes a point to be one of the more intense vocal performances that we've seen in any popular punk records throughout 2025 so far, and overall this is a really strong debut, and I'm excited to see not only where they go from here, but also how much more they can continue to piss people off. I think it'll be interesting to see. I'm going to give this record 3.5 stars out of 5. Mike. Showbiz. Mike back with yet another great album, and I mean, honestly, who is surprised by this? Absolutely no one. The guy is one of the most consistent rappers on the planet right now, and while I would make the argument that he has yet to paint his masterpiece, so to speak, I still think this is a killer record. In fact, I actually consider it one of his best to date. I mean, the production here is absolutely amazing, no matter which track you go to. His songwriting is just as clever as it is introspective, and tracks like Watered Down and Lost Scribe feature some of his punchiest flows to date with a lot of variation in his delivery here that I really like to see, considering really one of the only flaws that I personally find in some of his lesser works are kind of that he comes across as a bit monotonous. So to see that completely done away with here in favor of a record that sees him really take on a few different personas in terms of delivery is really cool to see. Basically everything that could be good in a Mike album is here on Showbiz, and it once again sees him marking himself as one of the premier East Coast rappers of the current day, and you're missing out if you aren't keeping up with him at this point. I'm going to give this record 4 stars out of 5. Oklou, Choke Enough. This is a record I have legitimately a lot of admiration for. I mean, of course, the production is absolutely amazing, but also its way of presenting minimalism and making use of what's not there to create not only emotionally touching, but melodically memorable music is really unique. And now there are, in turn, a lot of moments here that also kind of don't feel like full songs, and while that definitely is intentional, it leaves me feeling a bit mixed about this record depending on the mood that I'm in, and it isn't admittedly always the most engaging listen either, especially if, again, you aren't in the right mood for something this intentionally limited structurally speaking, but as a whole, I think this is a really strong record, and one that I think is constantly interesting no matter what, both in concept and execution, and I could genuinely see a lot of musicians in the near future, especially within the more experimental side of artsy pop music, being hugely influenced by this album, because although I don't love it or consider it one of my favorites of the year so far, it is wildly unique, and I don't think there's really an apt comparison to make to it at the moment. I'm going to give this record 3.5 stars out of 5. Larry June, 2 Chainz, and The Alchemist. Life is Beautiful. Weird collab here because 2 Chainz and Larry June on Alchemist beats is bizarre for reasons I don't think I really need to fully describe, but honestly, it works. Both rappers in question have a nice bit of chemistry together. Larry June makes sense being over Alchemist beats and flowing over them well. He's constantly cool, but 2 Chainz honestly kind of steals the show here for me, adding a bit more animation to things, and the beats are solid too, albeit not Alchemist's best work to date or his most essential work or anything like that. And sure, lyrically or even musically, it isn't the most groundbreaking record in the world, but it is very well executed, well produced, and considering how unlikely it felt that these two particular MCs would flow together especially well, and the fact that they do on this record, it just makes me feel pretty impressed by it. Not in terms of what it actually is, but more so in terms of what it represents and how it was made. It's a record that feels like an unlikely collab that works out better than most regular collabs do. So, hey, credit where credit's due. I enjoy this one quite a bit. I'm going to give this record 3 stars out of 5. Westside Gunn, 12. Latest effort from Westside Gunn after a few records that I personally considered misses, and I really enjoy this one. I'm glad to finally get to talk about a Westside album on this channel where I'm not just constantly shitting on it. I'm really happy to talk about one that I like, because the beats are genuinely really great here, and songs like Adam Page and Dump World honestly have some of the best verses that Gunn has dropped in a hot minute, if I'm being completely real. I mean, he doesn't talk about anything that he hasn't a million times before, but damn, he's got some really smooth and energetic flows, and the appearances from Stove God Cooks here are pretty great too, and in fact, those features actually kind of remind me of how excited I am for him to finally follow up on Reasonable Drought sooner or later. But back to the album itself, it's cool to see another really good Westside Gunn album come out, even if Griselda are definitely past their peak at this point. But hey, maybe Gunn will prove me wrong and put out another really great record after this one if this is sort of an upward trajectory for him. I'd love to see that. I'm going to give this record 3.5 stars out of 5. Richard Dawson, End of the Middle. 2022's The Ruby Chord was arguably Richard Dawson at a creative peak, and the fact that it didn't make my top 50 albums of that year is baffling in retrospect, and one of several records that causes me to want to go back and redo that list because I had some questionable albums on there in retrospect, but nonetheless. Aside from that, that's another conversation for another day. This is an alright album from Richard Dawson. It's the first solo album that he's put out since then, and I mean, it's much more simplistic, and honestly, I don't really care for that. I mean, I appreciate the intimacy overall. It's definitely a nice quality that kind of harkens back to a lot of classic folk-oriented singer-songwriters, those Nick Drake or even Bill Fay type individuals, rest in peace to the latter, and I feel like Dawson's voice here is best suited for more epic instrumentals overall, or more mystical instrumentals, but as a whole, his songwriting is still as strong as ever, and even if I don't think it's his best, it's still a solid release overall, because it's Richard Dawson putting forth some very minimalistic but still very strong songs, and it may be a slightly disappointing follow-up, but I do enjoy it genuinely, and I don't hate it at all, even if it does kind of sound like that now that I'm hearing myself. I'm going to give this record 3 stars out of 5. Venturing, Ghostholding. Ghostholding, the debut for Jane Remover's side project Venturing, and sonically this is a pretty one-note album, but I don't really think that's a bad thing overall. I mean, I think that you could ask for this record to sound a little more diverse musically, and that is my biggest issue with it, the fact that there is a lack of versatility on display here sonically speaking, but at the same time, lyrically, it's a super strong outing with a lot of highlights for Jane from a songwriting perspective, tracks like Dead Forever and Famous Girl, and I mean, I do wish this album felt like more than a one-note, one-long song kind of record, but as a whole, I can't really complain, especially when, again, the quality of the lyricism and even vocal work here is honestly something to write home about when compared to other Jane Remover records, and I feel like this is definitely worth digging into, especially if you like Jane's stylistic shift on the still semi-recent Census Designated, which a lot of people really did, so I can see a lot of people loving this one as well. I'm going to give this record 3 stars out of 5. A Cloudy Sky. This Won't Be the Last Time. The latest studio album from acloudyskye is really good, unsurprisingly, with some great guitar tones, guitar work in general, some lovely production, and I honestly think that this record does a really nice job in sort of breaking up things throughout its runtime with those ambient and post-rock kind of segments, adding to the emotional weight and to the general atmosphere of the record in a way that I think is executed really nicely and never feels like it makes the album lose any sort of steam or energy or anything like that, and I think that specifically towards the midpoint of this record, it feels really easy to connect with this album on an emotional level as it builds things up through both minimalism and maximalism sonically at different points, various points throughout the track list. It's just a really pleasant experience overall, and if you like shoegaze adjacent, noisy, indie pop rock type stuff like this, then you would be missing out by not giving this one a shot. I'm going to give this record 3.5 stars out of 5. Sam Fender, People Watching. I'm admittedly a sucker for that Don Henley Boys of Summer style of wistful, nostalgic heartland rock, so I went into this record with some really high hopes, and the opening track, it really just sold me immediately. I love the title track from deep in the bottom of my heart, and I was so excited for the rest of the track list, and then every song sounded the same, and I got bored quick. I mean, this album is produced and sung beautifully, don't get me wrong, some really strong songwriting throughout as well, but man, is it very one note. I mean, I like these individual songs for the most part, couple weaker tracks, of course, but it's a snooze fest. It's just a record that doesn't really have the guts to try anything new, but, you know, it is a solid record for those that like this particular sound, with some highlights, no doubt, but a risk taker this one is not, and that ends up being a bit of a disappointment for me, because, again, while I may have a soft spot for this particular type of heartland rock, it doesn't really carry me throughout the entire record or leave me wanting to come back for more other than revisiting a song or two now and again. I'm going to give this record 2.5 stars out of 5. Tate McRae, So Close to What? Is this bad? Yes. does Tate McRae still exemplify the biggest issues with some of the worst modern pop stars at the moment, having no personality or charisma whatsoever and still trying to take a larger-than-life persona on that's meant to fill up stadiums? Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly how I would describe her and have consistently described her in the past. She is the human version of a slice of bread with nothing on it. Is the production here decent? Sure. Is this album good? No, but is it that bad? Not really in the grand scheme of things, because despite not being the Antichrist, she really is the definition of a terrible pop star, and this record is no different. It has no personality, it has no real energy, it doesn't feel unique musically or lyrically in any way, but at the same time, it doesn't do anything wrong, per se. It doesn't do anything that's grating to my ears. It just goes in one ear and right out the other, and doesn't provide any reason to really care about Tate McRae as a personality or anything like that. But it's also not the worst thing in the world, and while I do think she's come a long way from her debut album, easily one of my least favorite albums of the past few years, I also think that this is still bad. So, you know, that's not that great. I'm going to give this record 2 stars out of 5. Maruja, Tir Nanug. Another excellent EP from Maruja, and I don't really know what to say about them at this point that hasn't been said by myself and like 5,000 other people who talk about music on YouTube that's within their ballpark, but I mean, come on, very few bands out there have the potential for a stunning full-length album LP like they do. I mean, the improv work going on here blows out of the water most other bands' EPs, and I mean, extremely well-directed jazz improvisations that feel extremely fragile but still create this massive sound that comes across as pretty heavy at times is exactly what you get on this EP, and really what you get on most of their EPs up to this point. And generally speaking, this EP has a kind of sweeping atmosphere and almost irresistibly emotional tone in a way that kind of gets me a little bit choked up when I'm in the right state of mind for that kind of thing, and I just think it's great overall. The EP shows Maruja taking their jazzy sound and putting it in somewhat of a new light, going in more of a jam-based direction that isn't quite so focused on singular songs or ideas from track to track, more so blending and bleeding together into this one singular beast of an EP, and I think the final result is excellent and just another great EP from a band that hasn't managed to miss yet. I'm going to give this record 4 stars out of 5. Rebecca Black, Salvation. Rebecca Black's follow-up to Let Her Burn isn't quite as good as that record in my personal opinion, but I still like this album a lot, with the themes of autonomy and physical/sexual freedom being really engaging and painting a very vulnerable picture for Black's music once again, which is really nice. It creates a degree of earnesty and even in places sensuality for what is a musically bombastic and very well-produced pop record that I find myself being able to constantly enjoy. I just wish it was a little bit longer, just had a little bit more going for it, but the versatility that's on display here, the charisma, the production, it's all really strong, so I just kind of wish that there was a little bit more, but still a really good record and probably one of the more essential pop records we've gotten so far in 2025. I'm going to give this record 3.5 stars out of 5. Darkside, Nothing. Darkside are a very difficult band to grasp, and Nothing is no different. I mean, this is abstract in both the best and worst ways that something can be abstract. I mean, on one hand, it always keeps you guessing, it always throws new and interesting ideas at you while still building up a consistent atmosphere, but at the same time, there are a lot of moments here that admittedly feel kind of directionless or without a sense of purpose. Not to say that they don't actually have purpose, but that it just sort of feels like they don't have any specific direction that they're going in before it's switched up into a new idea entirely. But with that being said, it is an interesting and engaging record throughout, and I certainly couldn't say that Darkside are a disinteresting band or anything like that. I mean, it does become a bit winded in places, but it changes quickly enough that you don't really notice, and it tries to make new things stick on a regular enough basis that it's always interesting and pretty atmospherically strong too. So credit where credit's due, this is a very admirable album creatively speaking, and I enjoy it for the most part and find it to be pretty well executed overall. I'm going to give this record 3 stars out of 5. Panda Bear, Sinister, Grift. It's always cool to see someone like Animal Collective member and indie pop veteran Panda Bear still doing their thing and doing it well, and Sinister Grift is a really good record with some expectedly gorgeous neo-psychedelic lush production and a pretty entrancing atmosphere that's just as heavily heavily rooted in the modern psychedelic scene as it is stuff like classic 60s sunshine pop, Beach Boys type stuff, and it ends up feeling pretty easy to get lost in. Now, I will say that I do think a lot of this record ends up running out of steam towards the end, especially the album closer Defense, which I feel is a bit unmemorable and kind of leaves me walking away with not so much a sour taste in my mouth, but more so just a nothing taste in my mouth. But all in all, it is a really strong album with a lot of great tracks here, and I think it's one of Panda Bear's better recent solo releases, if I'm being completely honest. So, nice to see another good record from someone who's pretty consistently been involved with interesting and, generally speaking, just great music throughout the course of his career. I'm going to give this record 3.5 stars out of 5. Honningbarna, Soft Spot, Norwegian Punk's Honningbarna back with a new record, and I really enjoy this one, and the way that they harness the power of synthesizers here in a way that they really haven't before, certainly demonstrating some artistic growth and a bit of a new direction for them here as well, with some of the more anthemic moments kind of feeling more stadium ready, or at least larger venue ready, in the same way that we've seen developed by other punk bands within recent years like Turnstile, and even somewhat arguably Viagra Boys, among other popular examples. And I think that Honningbarna take that sound and provide a slightly more hardcore edge to it, making it sound unique for them, albeit definitely not better per se, pretty much on equal ground with other bands within the same vein that have gone in that direction in recent years. So yeah, overall, I expected this album to be very good, and it was, in fact, very good. No real surprise there, if I'm being real. I'm going to give this record 3.5 stars out of 5. Food House. To House. I'm just going to be completely transparent and say that this album speaks to me on a lot of levels, so I'm of course going to have a personal bias for it, but I love this one just as much as the initial Food House record. I mean, the production is great, it's so fun, it's punchy, some great samples that range from peculiar and interesting to just outright funny. I mean, that Smosh Shut Up on Credit Card Knife is a musical jump scare if I've ever heard one, and I mean, the melodies and vocal work is great, auto-tune is used really efficiently and effectively here, and the songwriting is genuinely outstanding. I mean, there's plenty of funny one-liners to kind of giggle at here, and that's always been a sort of quality of Food House's sound, and of hyperpop and digicore, or whatever you want to consider them in general, kind of that style, but at the same time, it's also a record that reflects on life and even trauma, and, you know, in some of the most unsafe times that we've seen for queer people in quite a while, this is an album that makes me laugh and cry in equal measure, and it's just really great stuff, and the track Everybody's Eyes made me cry, and is one of my favorite songs of the year, so, you know, not bad, not doing too bad there. Pretty great follow-up to the debut, pretty much on equal territory, in my opinion. I'm going to give this record 4 stars out of 5. Hesse Kassel, Brea, the first full-length studio album from Chilean art rock, art punk, post-rock fusion band Hesse Kassel is really good, with a lot of atmospheric and vicious moments in equal measure, making for an engaging listening experience through and through, and while I would argue that a couple of tracks here kind of overstay their welcome, especially some of the longer 10-plus minute tracks that feel maybe a bit overly long, a bit bloated after their climactic moments, I think that as a whole this is performed extraordinarily well, and it does deserve the accolades that it has been rightfully receiving since its initial release. This is a genuinely really good album, and I can see why a lot of people are considering it a critical darling at this point. It deserves that title. I'm going to give this record 3.5 stars out of 5. Ghost Mountain, October Country. Elusive rapper and frequent Cemetery collaborator Ghost Mountain, here with a proper full-length project finally, and damn, it's really good. I mean, the production is great, and songs like Hovel, for example, have some absolutely infectious hooks and choruses, with some strong lyricism to boot, being very emotional and introspective in some places. And I will say that while the vocal style here, being as monotonous as it is, and somewhat frustrating in places, does almost kind of force this album for me to be a record that I don't love, it's still extremely good stuff and wildly catchy in places, making for an album that leaves me excited to see what comes next, really. I'm going to give this record 3.5 stars out of 5. Michael Cera Palin, We Could Be Brave. It has been a full decade since Michael Cera Palin first stepped onto the emo scene with their 2015 debut EP, and things just never really seemed to work out for them. I mean, they got hyped, they took a hiatus, they came back, the pandemic hit, nothing ever really went well for them exactly, and now, a full 10 years later, we finally get their first full-length LP, We Could Be Brave, and honestly, it was worth the wait. I mean, the instrumentals are clean but punchy and have a variety going for them, ranging from the more traditional Midwest emo kind of stuff you might expect from a band like Michael Cera Palin, but also some more straight punk kind of sounds, and frontperson Elias Barbin is better than a lot of what there is to offer right now in the emo scene, with a great vocal power and charisma, as well as some excellent songwriting here. And I mean, this is just as emotionally vulnerable and relatable as it is a step up in terms of their songwriting, and as they talk about topics like wistfully wondering about where the time went, to as real and agreeable as hating crypto bros and crypto millionaires and thinking that they should all be bullied because, you know, they should be. I think it all just is really great from a personality perspective. It's easy to connect with, at least in my eyes, and as a whole, it just feels like a very real record, and the way that it wraps up with the 12-minute title track album closer could also go down as one of the best tracks that we get out of emo in general throughout the entirety of the year. Maybe one of the best tracks we get out of indie rock in general throughout the entirety of the year. Just a great debut album from a band that never really got their shot when they deserved to get it, and due to a string of bad luck finally getting out of their way and kind of having time to clear a path for Michael Cera Palin to succeed as a band now, I think that people seem to be resonating with this record finally, now that it's out, and I'm glad, because I am among those people, and I think this is a pretty great record and the start of a hopefully promising career. I'm going to give this record 4 stars out of 5. Saba and No ID, from the private collection of Saba and No ID. Rapper Saba and producer No ID link up here for a really good collaborative record, and just a really nice slice of chill, laid-back music. I mean, Saba here is great, expectedly, and the beats aren't half bad either, although I will say, sonically speaking, this album, in moments here and there, kind of feels a little too subtle for its own good, maybe a bit too minuscule sonically from time to time, but I also do appreciate the mellow vibe. It's nice to hear, and in the right mood, I can really connect with the full experience. I mean, I don't know, I do kind of wish there was a bit more versatility, but I don't know, that very airy, tight production here, some strong features, great performance and lyricism from Saba. It just makes a record that I can't really complain about that much, you know? It's an album that I really do enjoy, and I think that you should definitely give it a listen if you want to hear another rap release from the year so far that kind of takes things on the more nuanced and chilled out side, because it's a really good example of that particular kind of sound. I'm going to give this record 3.5 stars out of 5. Brian Daddario, Till the Morning. Brian Daddario of the Lemon Twigs' Daddario Brothers goes solo, and it ends up being a pretty solid, if not slightly unremarkable at times, work, with a lot of classic Baroque pop and folksy influences here that make it different from what most of the Lemon Twigs' usual work sounds like, but still undeniably very derivative of the late 60s and early 70s' pop rock world, just different corners of it from compared to what the Lemon Twigs usually derive from. But, I mean, hey, it is pulled off well here. I just feel like it isn't produced as well as it is on the average Lemon Twigs record. I feel like the Lemon Twigs usually have some more sonically powerful and anthemic moments, some more kind of spacious and grand kind of moments that this record doesn't really have, but as a solo singer-songwriter type record, despite not really feeling elevated lyrically or anything like that, you know, I still like it. I think it's well performed, well executed, and it has a vision of recreating sounds from a time long since past, and it does recreate those sounds pretty well overall, so I can't really complain. I'm going to give this record 3 stars out of 5. Spelling, Portrait of My Heart. Spelling goes in more of an alternative rock type direction here, and honestly, I don't really love it. I mean, I think her vocals here are still great, of course, and instrumentally it's well performed, but the whole theatrical style that has always defined the name Spelling kind of just lends itself to strings and Baroque elements and the more No Doubt and Garbage influenced kind of sound on this record. As a whole, it isn't bad, but I don't know, it just doesn't really work the best for me personally. But, you know, I appreciate the experimentation and the new direction for sure, and this album does feel very sincere and earnest, which I can appreciate, and the album closing cover of My Bloody Valentine's Sometimes is surprisingly solid, and also at least 2 songs here sound like the Hex Girls. So, do what you will with that information, but as a whole, I still think it's a solid album that has a lot of the best qualities of past Spelling releases. I just think it's kind of a shame that this new direction wasn't necessarily something that suited her or the rest of the band's talents in any particular way, and ends up feeling a bit more just like an average indie rock release, rather than a release by one of the more sonically unique projects within the realm of indie music throughout the past few years. Not a bad album by any means, just a bit unremarkable compared to previous Spelling releases. I'm going to give this record 3 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this episode of the Rapid Record Recap. Like I said at the beginning, this might become a quarterly series. I kind of need to get back into the swing of doing a quarterly series if I'm going to do that, but hey, we'll wait and see. I kind of didn't really upload the most consistently throughout the first couple months here, so that was definitely a big reason why I wanted to do at least something like this. But, if I end up missing a bunch of releases again throughout the next 3 months, then, I'll definitely do this again. If not, then maybe I'll reconsider how I do it. We'll wait and see on that. But that was the Rapid Record Recap for January through March of 2025. Thank you for watching the Infinite Jukebox, and I'll see you in the next one.